We are recording. Okay. All right. Well, good evening, everybody. It's about 5 o'clock. We're going to go ahead and get started. 5 o'clock here in Colorado. Sorry. Welcome to the second edition of Feed Your Way to Pregnancy webinar. Your stepping stone to a successful breeding season. Tonight's topic is going to be stallion success and having your stallion be accountable. My name is Mandy Wilkins. I am the Regional Sales Manager for Triple Crown Nutrition. I am based in Northern Colorado, and I am here in Fort Collins, Colorado at the lab of MPTI. So joining us today is the crew from MPTI, and also Dr. Vandergrift is on here as well. And we'll give you plenty of time to ask questions in the chat section, and we will get to them today. People are being recorded. We got it fixed this time, so this will be available after this webinar tonight, and we'll be able to put that online in the next few days, just so you know. So without any further ado, we'll get started with some introductions. Again, my name is Mandy. I'm with Triple Crown Nutrition, and I'm here with Lisa. Go ahead.
I'm Lisa Herickhoff, and I'm the president of Membrane Protective Technologies, and we are all here in Fort Collins, Colorado. And quick little background about MPTI. We are a company that has a threefold mission. First, we're developing technologies to improve your successful use of artificial reproductive technologies, or ART. So we improve sperm cells, we improve oocytes as they're cooled, frozen. Anytime they're outside of the body, we're taking care of those through proprietary technologies. Second part, we have a QC business to help you know a little bit more about your chances of success before you breed. And lastly, we have cryopreservation services for goats and sheep. And this is Dr. Myles Shepherd, almost finishing a PhD.
Yeah.
And so Myles is one of our employees.
Yeah, so like Lisa mentioned, I'm a PhD candidate at Colorado State University, but I've been with Membrane Protective Technologies for, gosh, a little over 4 years now. I've been here a while. I've had my fingers in a lot of different projects here, so this is a great opportunity for all of us to get to speak to you guys tonight.
Yes.
And Bill, you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I want to say hello to everybody and thank you for including me in this webinar series. I am an independent equine nutritional consultant working with all types of horses on a worldwide basis. Work with several stallion stations around the world, as well as a lot of large breeding farms, and and I'm also the consulting nutritionist for Triple Crown. I formulate all of the Triple Crown horse feeds and the forage products. And so I hope to bring some of my experience to this webinar to help you all out.
Awesome, thank you. And we have Amy behind the scenes. You guys can't see her. She's our tech support tonight. So we love Amy. Make huge help to us. So without further ado, we'll let these guys get started. We're going to start with MPTI tonight.
So we have a series of slides that we're going to share with you tonight so that we can better explain what we're talking about. We think it's a little bit more effective rather than just having a conversation, since we'll be talking about some anatomy and those type of things. Bill, last time you started with a take-home message, and so I loved that, so we're copying you. Take it as flattery, right? Copying is more flattery. So our take-home today appropriate quality at that time the mare is to be bred. And so the job of stallion owners and people who are getting their stallions ready to be bred, to be used, is to make sure that that sperm quality is of the right quality at the time it needs to be used. Now, to tell you a little bit more about this and how that stallion ties into the nutrition side of things, we're going to start with a quick overview of spermatogenesis, move into storage, and then seasonality, talk a little bit more about the details of the sperm cell itself and how nutrition impacts that, move into artificial reproductive technologies, and then wrap up. And then Bill's going to give you a whole lot more nutrition than we can ever give.
Okay.
Bill, We'll put our 2 cents in where we can.
If you guys have questions, please leave them in the chat section and we'll get to them at the end.
Great, perfect.
Okay.
Perfect. All right, Amy.
So to begin with, here's the picture on the left is just a pretty general anatomy picture of the male reproductive tract. Things that we're going to talk about tonight are seminal plasma, which are coming from the vesicular gland and the prostate gland. There's also a testicle here. We'll be talking about the epididymis, where the sperm is stored, and also the testicle where the sperm is generated. The other picture that I have up on this screen is a more close-up image of the testicle. But we have a zoomed-in picture next to that testicle, and this is a Sertoli cell. And that's where the sperm is going through spermatogenesis, and it starts at the outer edge of the cells, and then it moves in towards the lumen, so the seminiferous tubule. Here's a couple of cross-section images of that process happening in the Stallion testicle. But the cartoon on the left really shows you how it starts as that spermatogonium, and it differentiates down into a elongated, mature sperm at the ends. Now, while it's going through this spermatogenesis, it is the sperm or the cells are still capable of repairing themselves, which really leads to the importance of nutrition and making sure that you have the proper nutrients available to those cells, because it is a time of high metabolic demand. Now, also, once it has left the Sertoli cell and enters the seminiferous tubules, those sperm no longer have the ability to repair damage. So we'll be talking a little bit more about that throughout these slides.
So Myles, how long does this process take?
So this process from beginning to end, so I would say from beginning of spermatogenesis to ejaculation, you're looking at 55 to 60 days. So it's really important when you're planning your breeding season to really take that 2 to 3 months advance into consideration.
Yeah, and I think I'd also say that in terms of age of that stallion, starting at about age 2, we can see here that your testicular weight is going to improve. And with the improvement in testicular weight, you get a much higher production of sperm cells themselves. And so it makes it a lot easier to utilize for artificial reproductive technologies. And so, of course, then also as that stallion is growing and their testicles are growing, you want to make sure you feed for that testicular growth.
Correct. So we mentioned that a balanced diet for your stallion is important during this spermatogenesis. So things that will impact the health of those sperm being generated are minerals, antioxidants, vitamins, and especially fats. When you're thinking about sperm production, one of the driving forces is testosterone. And in order to produce testosterone, you need to have adequate amounts of cholesterol in the diet. Without that, you do end up seeing a reduction in sperm, total sperm produced per day. So, now there are other things that can impact spermatogenesis. So if you're feeding feeds that have herbicides, pesticides, or heavy metals in it, this actually can hurt the mitotic division of the cells and ultimately reduce the amount of sperm being generated. But the pesticides and herbicides can also damage the integrity of the spermatogonium before it even starts undergoing division.
So it can be a long-term impact. Yeah, it can inhibit amino acid uptake, which Bill, I think, will probably talk about a little bit in his part about nutrition. But so it'll inhibit amino acid uptake and produce substandard sperm cells.
Yeah. And the other thing that these harmful agents can do is modify hormone profiles. And of course, that's not good when you're trying to produce healthy sperm. But even more importantly, it can cause permanent damage to your Sertoli cells. So you have a long-term negative effect when you see this in the diet.
Okay, so let's take a step back now and let's look at the testicle itself and talk a little bit about the how that's formed, and after the sperm is matured, it travels into that lumen and then is stored in the epididymis, right?
Correct.
So, but in this epididymis, the repair capabilities of the sperm are virtually non-existent. So you had to have produced a really good quality sperm cell in order to get good sperm cells out of that epididymis. Now, the problem is, though, not only can you damage the sperm cell while it's being produced, but while it's sitting in this epididymis, it can be damaged. Some of those points of damage can be illness, for example. Myles, can you talk a little bit about why illness can impact those sperm cells that are in that epididymis?
Yeah, so a rise in the temperature, no matter what infection we're talking about, introduces cytokines to the epididymis. And so those cytokines will also induce oxidants to be formed in the epididymis. And you start seeing that sperm become damaged in their DNA, in their membrane integrity, all of those things. But if you have an adequate amount of antioxidants circulating in their diet, you can mitigate some of that damage.
What about parasites? So I know that I regularly give my horses warmer, but is that going to have an impact on these sperm cells that are sitting in the epididymis?
So not sure about the use of the wormers themselves having an impact on the sperm, but parasitic loads, especially heavy parasitic loads, are going to be pulling nutrients away from the rest of the body, including your testicles. So by controlling parasitic infections, you're also allowing proper nutrients to get to those sperm as well.
I think one of the other things that's interesting to note is bucking horses, for example, and bucking bulls have fertility problems because physical damage to the testicle themselves will affect fertility. And similarly, if a horse gets kicked in or near the testicle, you can cause scrotal thickening, and that can take months to resolve. So keeping your horse physically healthy, but also worrying about that nutrition, it's a twofold, game there. So one thing, can we collect sperm cells from that epididymis?
So we can. So if you have an emergency and you haven't saved enough semen on your stallion, we can do what's called an epididymal collection. A lot of that sperm was actually more eligible for something like intercytoplasmic sperm injection to make embryos, but it does afford you a little bit of insurance on your stallion.
Yeah, save those genetics, right?
Yeah.
All right.
So let me ask you this: how long? Let's say, unfortunately, if a stallion is going to pass away or it has passed away, how long of a period of time do they have in order to collect the semen that way off of the stallion to make it viable?
That's a great question, and the answer is it's kind of species dependent. But in most cases, you've got 24 hours to get it to a lab, so you could ship it overnight to somebody who has the expertise.
Do you want to make it cool, or do you want to ship it room temperature?
Oftentimes people do ship at room temperature, but you can cool it. While it's in the epididymis, it's going to be a little more resistant to cold shock than it is outside of the body. But I'd say that your best bet at saving those sperm is just getting in a car and going, get it to a lab. So
Awesome.
Yes. So let's change gears a little bit. Talk about testes with respect to seasonality, because in horses you do see seasonal changes in the testes themselves, in addition to age changes. So it becomes really important that you plan your breeding during your non-breeding season. So we need to ensure that you can take all the dietary changes here that will impact the thank you, Amy. Amy enjoyed her visual bouncing there.
We all enjoyed it here.
yeah.
To ensure that you can really take advantage of the best sperm quality in that breeding season. And using art, you want to take seasonality into account, because you can optimize for season, but you can't change a bad stallion into a great stallion. But by optimizing your nutrition during the off season, you can change a poor stallion into a better stallion. So.
Right. So the other thing I'll add is, we see that horses are they're seasonal breeders,
Right.
And that's largely due to the fact that they're trying to have their offspring born during months of the year where feed is abundant and will continue to be abundant for several months. So spring deliveries are pretty ideal for horses. Now, because of that, their hormone profiles are regulated by a photoperiod. So once the days start increasing in late December, the stallion's testosterone concentrations are also going to start to increase. So that's a really good opportunity to start evaluating your stallion's feed, making sure they have enough energy content in their diets, which will also increase the testicle weight of the stallion and increase the sperm production by the time you reach your peak breeding season.
Well, and talking about cholesterol, this is when it really is important so that they can start to produce enough testosterone to move into that breeding season.
Yep.
You know, one of the other things I recently read an article about ubiquinol and CoQ10. Adding that can actually help decrease some of those seasonal changes, some of those seasonal declines that we see. So if you absolutely need to get something bred, or you need to collect that semen during a shoulder season, for example, feeding something like ubiquinol and CoQ10, coenzyme Q10, can help improve that semen quality. Now, let's talk a little bit about that timeline, Myles. We talked a little bit earlier, it's a 55-day process. So when do I want to start feeding to get to the right breeding?
Yeah, so that's, late December, early January is that gives you a good solid 3 months to make adjustments before that breeding season. And in fact, having their semen tested early in the year is pretty ideal. So that allows you to start testing as early as the beginning of March.
And then make last minute
changes if necessary.
Perfect. Okay, so let's dive in a little bit to the sperm cell itself. We've kind of talked around the sperm cell itself. Let's talk about it. So 3 major parts to this sperm cell: the acrosome, DNA, and of course mitochondria. The mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, and it drives probably the most recognized characteristic of sperm cells, and that is motility. Myles, you want to talk a little about our Olympic Picasso picture that we have up here?
Yeah, so these are videos that I captured using our computer-assisted sperm analyzer. And this is just kind of a fun little thing I like to do with people to see how good they are at assessing motility visually, because these CASAs can take the bias out of that. So just take a look at this and try to decide how motile you think these cells are. And here in a second, it'll capture a frame and it'll tell us just how motile these sperm are. So if you thought it was about 30% motile, you're correct. Now, the other thing that these machines can do is they give us a pretty cool picture at individual sperm parameters. So their individual sperm trajectory, things like beat frequency and their path velocity. So it gives us more information.
And actually, nutrition can affect those.
Yes, and nutrition can affect that. Now here's another slide. So again, just try to decide how motile you think it is.
I think these are harder to do when you have more sperm that are actually more motile.
Yep. So this one was just under 60% motile. Now, like Lisa said, nutrition definitely impacts things like motility. Antioxidants are one of the big ones that help keep motility in check.
Right. So motility can be affected by a lot of parameters, and one of which certainly is the integrity of that cell membrane. Probably the most recognizable spot where we see integrity of that cell membrane is on what's called the acrosome. And the acrosome, Myles, you want to talk a little bit about what the acrosome is and talk about this picture a little bit?
So in the previous slide, Lisa mentioned the mitochondria, so our powerhouse of the cell. And because that mitochondria is making a lot of energy for the cell, it's also producing a lot of oxidants. And those oxidants can not only hamper motility, but it can also modify or alter the sperm's membrane. And that's where this part becomes important, because an acrosome, the membrane has to be intact over top of the acrosomal cap for it to be viable. And it has to remain intact all the way up until the point of fertilization. So if that happens too soon, that sperm's no longer viable. Now, what we have images here of is, these are actually images we took in our lab. We've stained them with different stains. The one on the left is a normal sperm. So that red top is indicating that that acrosomal cap is nice and intact. Now the image on the left is the sperm has started to undergo the acrosome reaction. And so that membrane has peeled back a little bit and exposed the acrosome. And so the stain is labeling proteins on that acrosome and indicating that it's reacted.
Well, and some of the things I think that are going to help in terms of nutrition that are going to help that membrane stay intact are alpha tocopherol, some of the antioxidants you mentioned,
Yeah.
zinc and selenium.
Zinc, selenium.
Some of those things become very important. And I should have mentioned actually earlier when we were talking about motility, copper is actually a really important part of maintaining motility in a cell as well.
Oh yeah.
So, and we see some of the omega-3 and omega-6 free fatty acids that also will really impact acrosome quality.
Well, and a lot of those fatty acids too will also have a positive impact on motility. It allows them to remain flexible and able to move.
Yes. So speaking of flexibility, let's look at the cell as a whole and look at the morphology. Does nutrition impact the development of that sperm cell in terms of how it ends up looking?
Yeah, well, I mean, to answer your question in a more broad sense, we mentioned this in actually the previous seminar. The body condition score does absolutely have an impact on sperm morphology. So if they're under condition or over condition, you can start to see those abnormalities present. But also, a stallion that is very over conditioned with a really high body condition score will start having cytoplasmic droplets appear on their midpiece. And that's what Amy's kind of using her pointer here to show us. And it's not really a great thing. I mean, our midpiece has all the mitochondria in it, and it causes a lot of downstream negative effects.
So that mitochondria, just like the cytoplasmic droplet, produces a lot of oxidants in and of itself. So motility is a great thing, but it's also a bad thing because it's creating all the items that are going to destroy it. And so what kind of impacts do oxidants actually have physically on the cell?
Yeah, so oxidants, well, for one, they'll depolarize the mitochondria, so they'll stop producing energy. But it'll also cause sperm membrane damage. Of course, an early acrosome reaction is part of that as well. And one of the other more important things is DNA fragmentation. Now, it's important because I mentioned earlier that sperm no longer have the machinery necessary to repair themselves. So if their DNA becomes severely fragmented, that starts translating over into early embryonic loss, and also
About
early
day
pregnancy.
30, 35, yeah.
Yeah, and also early pregnancy failure.
So sperm isn't just by itself when it's ejaculated, it's in a fluid called seminal plasma. And that seminal plasma contains a lot of what you're feeding that animal. It's going to contain a lot of those proteins and antioxidants, sugars, salts. So you have to bathe those sperm cells in the right type of fluid as well. So we have to feed for this seminal plasma. Now I will say that a good chunk of this seminal plasma is lipids. And so we've talked a little bit about cholesterol, but we need to think about the other polyunsaturated fatty acids that are going to have an impact here. Now, one of the things to note is that seminal plasma is actually diluted away when we do artificial reproductive technologies. So when you process the sperm cells, it's going to be diluted, but it still impacts sperm quality. You want to talk a little bit about why seminal plasma is important, Myles?
Yeah, so I'm sorry if I missed this while you were talking, but the proteins found in seminal plasma are largely responsible for coating the sperm cell and activating the motility as it's leaving the epididymis. So having a healthy profile of proteins is important to having healthy motility as well.
Absolutely.
The antioxidants, I know we keep hammering antioxidants, but it's really important because it's about the only thing you can do to prevent damage in a sperm cell. And you have your sugars and whatnot that help provide energy to the cell, especially if you're going to be using long-term storage for artificial insemination.
Right. Some of those linseed oil and again, the polyunsaturated fatty acids, the DHA, DPA, we hear about these, especially when we talk about human vitamins, but they're just as important in horse vitamins, especially because it relates to reproduction. So the most common forms of, besides live cover, of assisted reproductive technologies are cooled sperm, frozen sperm, and intercytoplasmic sperm injection. Now, both those cooled sperm and frozen sperm go through some pretty shocking environmental changes as they transition from the body out into our big wide world, and then are subjected to some not so nice temperatures and some not so nice compounds. For example, we subject them to cryoprotectants, which will cause significant osmotic changes. How can we protect with nutrition against some of those osmotic changes, Myles?
Yep. So those osmotic changes are, I mean, they're pretty detrimental to the sperm. But a sperm that's resistant to it, obviously, is going to freeze much better. Now, one of the best ways to prevent that is by increasing the polyunsaturated fatty acid content in the cell membrane, allowing it to be a little more fluid and allowing the cryoprotectant to move back and forth in that cell more readily. So yeah, those polyunsaturated fatty acids in the diet do actually become incorporated in sperm membrane during spermatogenesis.
Okay. So now we've talked through the sperm cell, let's talk a little bit about preparing for breeding. And one of the things you can do is have your animal, and if you have our stallion owner, you're probably familiar with the breeding soundness exam. We suggest suggest that you move beyond just a breeding soundness exam and really look at those sperm cells themselves and try to understand what's going on with the sperm cell, because that's going to allow you to adjust your feeding program to compensate for some of those problems, to improve your fertility of that stallion and the success of that sperm cell as it goes through artificial reproductive technologies. So, as Myles mentioned earlier, start feeding now, test in March, feed for another month or two, and then use for breeding. Assuming you're in a North American time frame. So I think that'll get you to having sperm at the appropriate time. And I think Bill will talk a little bit more about what specifically the antioxidants and the specific nutrients that are required here for those, to support those processes.
Thank you guys very much. That was awesome.
Okay. Yeah, that's a great presentation. I think everybody hopefully picked up and learned something from that. And by the way, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, very good. In terms of nutrition for the stallion, now you correctly addressed several of those things. So I'm just going to kind of add to that, maybe go into a little bit more detail. I don't know if you can hear that in the background. I've got an unhappy dog that's wanting to get to me, I think. He'll just have to wait. But at any rate, we talked about body condition of the stallion, and that's basically determined by the protein and the energy intake. And really, you want to try and maintain your stallion in a desired body condition throughout the year. And that's basically your protein and your energy intake. Now, during the non-breeding season, a stallion's protein requirement really is not that different, so to speak, than a horse at maintenance. So it's during the non-breeding season, it's fairly easy, or should be fairly easy, to maintain your stallions. But as you correctly mentioned, though, when you're gearing up for breeding season, you don't want to wait. And for example, in thoroughbreds where everything's live cover, and that usually your rule of thumb is the breeding sheds open up Valentine's Day. Isn't that appropriate?
I love that.
So yeah, so you don't want to wait until February 14th and then all of a sudden go, oh, we're going to start breeding mayors, and then think about making sure your stallion's ready to go. So I think you did an excellent job of emphasizing the fact that, you know, you need to prepare your stallion beforehand so that when breeding season does begin, that they are in fact ready to go. Before I forget, something that most of you, I think, are very aware of, but again, you know, need to be reminded. Each stallion is an individual. And so they've got their quirks, they've got their personality differences, they've got their physiological differences. And so when it comes down to the nitty gritty, you've actually got to manage, you know, each stallion as an individual. Some handle breeding season without any problem. Others tend to get a little out. And so those that are more prone to being stressed, we talked about antioxidants. This is how I'm playing into that. Those stallions that tend to be a little bit more hyper, maybe possibly a little bit more timid, those that, you know, display stress more so than the rest, their antioxidant requirements actually going to be greater than one that's more calm and more laid back. So what are the antioxidants that we keep talking about? Well, some of the key ones, we always think of vitamin E, we think of selenium, we think of zinc, we think of copper, as you've already mentioned. Vitamin A is also an important antioxidant for breeding purposes. And even though we think of horses as normally producing vitamin C on their own, again, if we have a individual horse, doesn't matter if it's a stallion or performance horse, if they tend to be stressed more so than the rest, then sometimes they don't produce enough vitamin C to meet the requirement. So in such cases, or for individuals, it's always a good idea then to supplement some extra vitamin C also. And keep in mind that vitamin C is water soluble, so it works inside the membrane of the cell. Vitamin E is a fat soluble vitamin, so it tends to work on the membrane, which is a fat based part of the cell. So vitamin E and vitamin C are very complementary with each other, as is selenium. So often we will include vitamin E as well as vitamin C and the other trace minerals as antioxidants. And you correctly mentioned that they can have a tremendous effect on spermatogenesis and sperm quality. One thing to also keep in mind is that protein quality plays an important part in, you know, the health of the stallion and his ability to produce sperm and be a successful breeder. Because we mentioned during the off season, you know, the total protein requirement may not be that high, but the protein quality still needs to be there. Okay. So it's not just a question of, well, he's maintaining his body conditions, so everything must be fine. Because you can't, unless you're doing assays, you can't tell what's going on in those testicles in terms of sperm production and so forth. So you want to ensure, even during the non-breeding season, that protein quality, which translates to amino acid content and amino acid balance, is correct and adequate. In terms of, you know, fats and fatty acids, and again, you mentioned these, but primarily the omega-3s, linolenic acid, EPA, DHA, DPA, those have already been mentioned, but I want to reemphasize how important those can be. And essentially, when we discuss especially DHA and DPA for the stallion, you're not going to find those in basically an oat, you know, based feeding program, you're going to find those in either fish oil or some of the algae products that are out there. Green mussel type products are high in DPA. So you're going to have to look at some specialized fat sources in order to get those particular omega-3s. And in addition to, linseed, which, remember, linseed is your best source of linolenic acid, which is your dietary essential omega-3. In other words, the horse cannot make that. So you have to supply it in the diet. So it's always a good idea, to have some type of linseed source, whether it's a linseed meal or a linseed oil, but then also add some of those, DHA, DPA sources. Now, we talk about mayors later on. EPA sometimes is more important for the mayor than it is for the stallion. When we look at spermatogenesis in the stallion, I think we mean to put more emphasis on DHA and DPA. So there is a little bit of a difference there between the sexes when you get specific into it. So to summarize it, maintain your stallion in a moderate body condition. Include in that the individuality of the stallion. Do they tend to be laid back, Mr. Joe Cool, so to speak, or do they get uptight? In which case, then they're going to burn more nervous calories, figuratively and literally, and their need for antioxidants is also going to go up. Share an interesting case that I had several years ago. That some of the weird things you run into working with a stallion station. I'll just say over in Asia, and you could, in the middle of the breeding season, you could go through the stallion barn and you could identify which stallions were breeding the highest number of mayors and line them up numerically simply by looking at how much hair they had lost off of their rump area. And it turned out that in this particular geographical area, a lot of the zinc that was in the pasture grass was actually being tied up.
Oh.
So even though when you did a feeding evaluation and it looked like there was enough zinc, when then you looked at the balance of all those minerals, you realized it wasn't balanced. And so what we had to do, or what we did, was added additional zinc in an organic form. That's another point too, is your organic type minerals, especially zinc and copper, for stallions are going to be more effective than things like zinc oxide or copper sulfate, et cetera. It's good. You can have that combination, but you want some type of, organic, more available type mineral source in there as well. So what we did was we increased the zinc intake using organic mineral or an organic zinc source. And the following breeding season, all the stallions kept their hair. So, but it underscored, though, the importance of zinc, and underscored the importance of good trace mineral balance and antioxidant intake, as you all correctly mentioned. So, I guess that's about it. So if anybody's got any questions or more specific questions, I guess I will add something, and I'm going to start off the question and answer period myself. Okay, I'm going to ask you all a question. One of the questions that I get asked a lot is, you've got a stallion with a low sperm count. Okay, what can you do, if anything, okay, to improve a stallion's total sperm count? Now, I'm not talking about sperm quality in terms of motility and such, just a stallion that just doesn't produce a large number of sperm cells.
Want to talk about that, Myles?
Yeah, well, I mean, first off, every stallion is different, just like you mentioned. Some of them might not be able to recover from something like that.
Yep.
But making sure that they have appropriate energy content in their diet is one thing that's going to help, because that will increase testosterone, it will increase the testicular weight, and that's all directly correlated to sperm production. So that could definitely help increase total sperm.
I guess it also matters how often that stallion is being used for breeding. If he's being collected frequently, you're going to deplete those reserves of sperm that are available. So sometimes a little rest will help that stallion produce a few more sperm cells.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think our 10,000 foot view.
Yep. Well, let me throw something else in that I've run into. Whether it's a stallion that's being collected or a stallion like a thoroughbred that's being asked to do all natural cover. Some stallions just don't have a very high libido. They especially with live cover, I've seen, a mare that is definitely ready to be bred and the stallion will be introduced to her and he's like, not today. He just doesn't seem to have much interest. So obviously the question then is what can we do then to improve, the stallion's libido and attitude and so forth. And we have had some success in that regard by looking at their energy metabolism. And because we already know that these are stallions that, the amino acid nutrition is already good, the mineral nutrition is already good, the antioxidant nutrition is already good. So what else can we do? And we tend to look at how they're metabolizing energy. We're looking at their insulin levels, and they're not necessarily insulin resistant, but they're not really, shall we say, they don't have a high level of metabolism. And simply by including some components into the diet where we improve blood circulation, we do that with some nitric oxide producing nutrients, and also with chromium. Chromium will enhance insulin sensitivity, will improve energy metabolism. And we've actually noticed that some of these stallions that have a low libido, when you introduce both chromium and some nitric oxide generating nutrients into their diet, they will become more, shall we say, more normal, and their breeding success will go up. So that's just a little trick of the trade there that we've learned the hard way.
That's awesome.
Bill, we actually had a similar thing happen to us about a year ago. We had a pig breeder contact us, and he had a boar. Granted, his case was a little different. This boar was pretty old with respect to how long pig breeders keep pigs around. And he was just no longer jumping sows, no longer interested in sows. And come to find out, we ended up looking at the guy's his feed tag. He was feeding that boar a finisher diet, which doesn't have a lot of fat in it because you don't want fat on pigs. And so by supplementing that fat back into that boar's diet, he returned servicing sows in a matter of a month or two.
Improved his testosterone levels, the cholesterol.
Yep.
Yeah, it's important. Yeah, diet has a real impact on libido, which I tend to think we all dismiss, but it really does. So thanks for bringing that up. That's a great point.
Okay.
Bill, what would you say about adding flax to the diet to help for your stallions to increase the omega-3s to their diet? Would that be a good suggestion to do that, like our golden brown flax? Shameless plug there.
Well, yeah, I mean, as we mentioned, the omega-3 or the omega-6, omega-3 ratio can come into play. But instead of getting hung up on that ratio, I think it's more important just to make sure you've got an omega-3 source in your stallion's diet. Now, a lot of the feeds that are available on the market today have already included omega-3 sources, and a lot of those are using, linseed, or linseed and flax essentially are the same thing. Okay. So they'll already have some flaxseed in them. Now let me correct myself a little bit right there. So make sure we don't get confused. There is a bit of a difference in the terminology between linseed and flax. Okay. When you see linseed meal on a feed tag, that is usually the flax with the oil taken out. Okay, so the flax oil has been removed, and what's left then is called linseed meal. Okay, so it will still have some omega-3s in it, but it won't be nearly as high as flaxseed. Okay, so when you look at your feed tag, really what you want to see is whole ground flaxseed as part of the ingredient listing. And Mandy, you correctly mentioned that Triple Crown has a flaxseed product that they sell, and of course that is the flax seed. It's stabilized with the full fat content. And that's another comment we get a lot is if you take whole flax and you grind it yourself, and some people used to do that. Then the comment was you want to feed that fairly quickly because the oil is not very stable and it can go rancid. There's great technology now that can stabilize that oil in that flaxseed meal, ground flaxseed meal. So that allows companies like Triple Crown then to offer you a ground flaxseed meal that is stable. So it can sit in your barn and it won't go rancid. So whether you're using a feed that's already incorporated those omega-3s in it, or you're buying a straight stabilized flaxseed meal, that's a great way to supply those omega-3s, into your diet. Okay.
Bill, would you mind talking a little bit about why we would feed Triple Crown Growth to our mares and our stallions during, and what time of the year we would feed that to our mares and our stallions during our breeding season?
Okay. Well, the reason you'd feed the Triple Crown Growth, earlier, and by the way, I did not know Mandy was going to ask me these questions. So this is no, that's fine. Because what I want to say is it leads right into what I was saying before. Okay. So it's a great question. But the Triple Crown Growth incorporates everything that we talked about previously. Okay. It incorporates your protein quality, your amino acid balance. It incorporates the discussion about the antioxidants, vitamin E, vitamin C, zinc, copper, vitamin A, selenium, organic selenium. It incorporates, the available zinc and the available copper sources. So everything is there in the right proportion for the stallion. So that makes a pretty nice feed selection for stallions. Now for brood mares, when they begin lactating, and I guess we can talk about this in a little bit more detail in the next webinar, but their protein requirement in particular essentially doubles, okay, when they start producing milk. So they're going to need higher protein. Protein quality becomes extremely important for those lactating mares. So it's a product that fits both the growing horse, the lactating mare, as well as the breeding stallion. Okay.
Thank you, Bill. Hey, we have a question from Dee Dee. She asked, I had read that flax has some estrogenic effects. Does this affect sperm quality?
Yes, the answer is yes, it does. We oftentimes look at what's called the follicular wave of a mare's estrous cycle. So we see these oscillating hormones of, luteinizing hormone and follicular stimulating hormone. And those are released off of signaling by things like estrogen. Now, stallions also have these follicular waves. We don't talk about them as often in stallions, but they happen several times in a day. And having too much estrogen circulating in the body is definitely going to disrupt that normal follicular wave cycle, and so it will have a negative effect on sperm quality and sperm production.
I think you're talking though beyond your nutritional levels of
Yeah.
excuse me, of flax. So there's going to be a threshold beyond which it doesn't, or before which it does not impact that.
Correct.
So feeding too much, for example, could though.
Yep.
Feeding anything, not too much of anything.
Absolutely, yeah,
Yeah.
right. Too much chocolate, darn it.
I don't think.
All things in moderation. Yes.
Right. Exactly.
So we want to remind you, we've got a couple of questions coming in. There is a chat section in here that you can ask your questions. It has the little message bar. You can type a question in there. Looks like we have one coming in from Ashley. You can also raise your hand, and we can unmute you from our side as well if you'd rather just ask it to
That might
everyone.
be the easier one, Ashley. It looks like your question might be a little long. Maybe we should just unmute you.
Well, or our computer's freezing.
Oh, okay.
I don't think so.
Oh, there we go, Ashley. Third one down.
She's got to raise her hand.
Ashley, if you can raise your hand, we can unmute you.
Or anybody else who has a
Yes.
question.
Oh, Kelly has her hand up. Kelly, is there something why don't we unmute Kelly and then we'll figure that one. Okay. Kelly, you had a question?
No. Okay, well, I guess we're gonna go ahead and wrap this up for tonight. We have recorded this whole session, so we will make that available on the Triple Crown Facebook page, and MPTI will make a link available to that as well. It will go on our YouTube channel as well. And we certainly appreciate all of you joining us this evening. We have our third and final webinar that will be on Thursday, December 10th. And that is from 6 to 7 Central Time. Again, that's 4 Pacific, 5 Mountain, 6 Central, 7 Eastern time. And that is on December 10th as well. And that one is going to be on your mare success from breeding to foaling. If you guys have any questions, I am the one that sent you all the login information tonight. You are more than welcome to email those questions to me. You're welcome to contact the folks here at MPTI as well.
Check out our website, send them to us on our website, or shoot us an email, or give us a call.
Absolutely, that's my cell phone number on there. We also have an 800 number if you go on triplecrownfeed.com, and we can get you into the correct person in your area as well. So again, thank you, Bill. Thank you, Lisa, Myles, and Amy behind the scenes here for an awesome evening. And we appreciate all of you joining us, and we will see you again in a few weeks.
Thanks so much, Mandy.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.